Hello and welcome to Chapter 16, the lymphatic system and lymphoid tissue. In this chapter, we're going to look at the function of the lymphatic system, including fluid balance, protection, and fat absorption. We're going to look briefly at the lymphatic circulation. We will be looking at lymphatic tissue, especially the function of the lymph nodes, the spleen, and the thymus. And then very briefly look at disorders. Okay, notice that most of the lymphoid words have the word lymph in it: lymph node, lymphatic duct, lymphoedemapathology. Good words. The lymph system is a system that runs kind of parallel to the circulatory system. It's a system of vessels and tissues, and it's scattered throughout the body, and it services most of the body. It is a one-way system. It begins in the tissues and it re-enters in the blood vessels. So if you look at the circulatory system, we've seen the circulatory system and it enters, so the lymphatic systems collect the fluid in the capillaries. Then it gets filtered and cleaned in the lymph node. There are valves in it, just like the veins, and it gets pumped back through systemic muscles and breathing, and it gets dumped into the subclavian vein into the circulatory system, and then it goes right through the into the blood. Small amount of filtering in the lymph node. Other than that, it's pretty much directly in there. When we look at the capillaries have little fingers that go right into the blood capillaries. The lymphatic capillaries do not have such tight junctions. There's gap between cells. So as a result, the fluid and suspension cells, or in the interstitial fluid that didn't get taken back into the capillaries, can be put into the lymphatic system. So there's capillary walls, and they're flattened epithelial. They're more permeable than blood capillaries. They overlap to have one-way valves. They rise blindly, which means they're on one end. And very important, in the digestive system, they absorb fat in the lacteal, if you remember back to the digestive system. When you look at the location of the lymph nodes, you have two or three primary locations. You have them in the side of your head. So when you had swelling, looks like you have tonsillitis, they say your glands are swollen. Your glands aren't swollen. It's actually your lymph nodes that are swollen. Here they can collect all the food that they collect from the area that is by your nose and mouth. So this way they can filter out any extra disease that got through in your nose and mouth. Then there's also some axillary nodes, which will filter the blood that comes from the arm. Then there's some mesenteric nodes, which filter the lymph that comes from the digestive system, including the fat that's absorbed in the lacteal. Then you've got the inguinal system, or the iliac nodes and the inguinal nodes. They will absorb and clean the fluid that was located in the feet. Notice that if you've ever had females, when you have a breast examination, the doctor will often go into your armpit to see if there's any swollen lymph nodes there. The reason why is quite often, if any cancerous cells are picked up in the breast tissue, they may be sort of stuck in the lymph node for a while trying to get cleaned up. Or there could be swelling there because of white blood cells being present in order to destroy the cancer tissue. So you should be feeling it. And males, when you have a testicular exam, you should also be feeling the lymph in the nodes in the inguinal area. Now, we talked about the the lymphatic system emptying back into the circulatory system. Just before the vena cava joins, you have the right lymphatic duct going into the right subclavian vein, and then you just have the thoracic duct going into the left subclavian vein. Oh, excuse me. So the lymph system will dump into the circulatory system in the subclavian vein. Okay? Please realize I want you to know the main nodes, the axillary nodes, the mammillary nodes, lumbar nodes, femoral nodes, popliteal nodes, inguinal nodes. Again, they're all based on their body location. Please note that I want you to know the right lymphatic duct goes into the right subclavian vein, and the thoracic duct goes into the left subclavian vein. When we look at the movement of lymph, lymph is moved towards the heart, and it's got valves in lymphatic. It moves by the contraction of the lymphatic vessels. Also, skeletal muscles help move that back, and breathing. If you've ever had a good massage, they'll often go towards your heart, and the whole idea of towards your heart is to help move that lymphatic system, move that lymph fluid towards your heart. Now, inside the lymph fluid is called lymph. It's quite similar to blood, but it doesn't have the proteins or the blood cells. Now, there are lymphatic tissue. They are circulated throughout the body, and they are specialized tissues. You have the tonsils, the lymph nodes. Notice the lymph nodes are in a couple places. The spleen, the thymus, and another interesting collection of lymph nodes, Pryor's patches. And Pryor's patches are in the small intestine, and they help destroy some of the bacteria that's coming from your large intestine, so that way you have a good flora of bacteria in your large intestine, but it doesn't get into your small intestine. When you look at the lymph nodes, there's cervical, axillary, trachobronchial, mesentery, and inguinal. Basically, you have them in the areas mentioned. When you look at a lymph node, you don't need to know all the layers of it. Just realize it is quite complicated. You have an outside layer, and then the inside is more pulpy. You have an afferent lymphatic vessel that goes towards the node, and an efferent goes away. It's alphabetical. Afferent in, efferent away. You have valves. You have a capsule. You have your node inside, and your hilum on the outside to protect it. Ooh, excuse me. Okay, you don't need to know all the details on that. Next, the spleen. If you remember the location of the spleen is located on the back, sort of, if you look at kind of behind the liver. Now, the thing about the spleen is it can easily be damaged because it does not have a hard covering on it. The whole function of the spleen is to cleanse the blood. So for clarification, the lymph is cleansed by the lymph node. The spleen is cleansing the blood. It filters it. It has phagocytosis, which are those white blood cells that come in and destroy old blood cells. It's also the location of red blood cells before birth, and it's also a reservoir for blood. Easily damaged, and it can be removed, and your liver will take over some of the function. The thymus gland. The thymus gland is at the base of the neck. When we talk about immunity, we'll talk about T cells. The T cells are developed in the thymus gland. So they start in bone marrow, because they're a type of white blood cell. Then they go and they are sort of modified in the thymus. It's very large in a child, shrinks at puberty. Very important in the immune system. Tonsils. Once upon a time, they used to always remove the tonsils. Now they don't. The tonsils will remove contaminants, trap pathogens, which are disease-causing organisms. You have 3 different sets of them. Sometimes they're removed because when they're enlarged, it makes it difficult to breathe. You have other lymphatic tissue, the appendix, Then you have something called MALT and gut associated, mucosal associated and gut associated. The gut associated one is the Pryor's patch. And as I said, the Pryor's patch is located by the large intestine. Let me find that image again. It's in the small intestine to absorb extra cells before they go into the large intestine. Good. Where am I? You don't need to know a lot about all the other ones. When you come to diseases, one is elephantitis. Oh, here's one where you can see marks where the disease is moving through the lymph tissue. You can also see lymphoma, which is a type of cancer, and you have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. One disease we didn't talk about, we talked about a little bit when we talked about pathogens in chapter 5. Elephantitis. Elephantitis is where the lymph nodes are swollen because a worm gets in there, the ascus worm. And then the worm will plug the lymph node or the lymphatic tissue, ending in swelling, and then your leg swells up like an elephant. That's pretty much all we need to know. That's enough for the spleen. Notice you have oid. It remembers it's resembling. Adenoid is a gland. Lingual tongue pathy is again a disease. Megaly is the enlargement of. And that is the end of chapter 15. So 16.